morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. We live in a very unusual time. This pandemic crisis is unprecedented in terms of its scope and scale. Perhaps for the first time in modern history, everybody, no matter where you are on this planet, are on the same boat. And this actually emphasizes even more the relevance and the importance of organizations like the World Bank in terms of understanding the impact and helping countries mitigate the impact. With every challenge, there's opportunities. And I believe, and we're already seeing this, that the magnitude of this crisis is now enabling transformation and change in areas that we couldn't have envisaged earlier. So I'm going to focus on my presentation today on the transformation opportunities in terms of developing digital capabilities in different countries, and to talk about some of the specific pillars. If you can go back to the previous slide, we've had a significant impact on the global GDP due to this crisis. We're also seeing a significant number of job losses, and this is going to continue to escalate well into Q3, Q4, even as businesses start recovering. And then some of the services sectors, tourism, travel, hospitality, retail, are going to take a significant number of years to recover. And finally, foreign direct investment is also dropping, and it's important for nations to prepare plans to address this shortfall, which is expected to be about 20%. So if you go to the next slide, this pandemic crisis has a certain life cycle. And what we have seen is that as the crisis was escalating, the priority of public sector and government was really to mitigate the health crisis. As they were able to stabilize their health systems, they shifted their focus towards the impact on the economy. And so focus shifted more to socioeconomic stabilizing in terms of supporting local businesses, providing some incentives, ensuring that the critical supply chains were still functioning normally. As the pandemic reaches its peak and starts declining, these countries are faced with choices. And I think that's where it's important to understand that depending on the speed and the type of response, the recovery cycle from this crisis is going to be shifted in time. What we estimate based on this is if governments and development institutions are proactive in supporting some of the critical sectors like public services, small businesses, trade and investment, supply chain, education, then we are potentially in a position to get back to some sort of a new normal within the next 6 to 12 months. However, if that's delayed a little bit, that's going to have a significantly longer recovery cycle. As the crisis further subsides, the shift towards more digitalization in the public and private sector is going to be very important. New incentives have to be rolled out, and then there has to be support for some of the other sectors in food, retail, tourism, travel, so that they can recover quickly. And finally, there has to be a renewed focus on reskilling of talent and development of digital skills. If you move to the next slide, here we're talking about the impact on different categories from this crisis. As you can see, that employment, public health, and some of the services sectors like tourism, retail are seeing significant impact. In some cases like tourism, it's 95% impact. And in other sectors such as foreign direct investment inflows or public services and transportation, there's a major impact. And as you can see on the right side, technology digital services have a minimal impact. And that leads us to the important realization, if you can go to the next slide, that digital adoption has been one of the key differentiators. What we're seeing is economies that were already on this journey towards transforming to a more digital economy they are able to handle this impact better and also will have a shorter recovery cycle. So this brings into focus these 4 areas that we see as being sort of more prevalent in the years going forward. Digitalization of business and government and public sector, and service sector globalization, which will focus more on domestic and regional markets, reskilling of talent to develop more skills, and then focus on developing digital services. That's going to be the 4 important areas of focus. Go to the next slide. Leads us to sort of a roadmap for recovering and focus on the socioeconomic development. These 3 pillars really look at, first of all, enabling the whole digital ecosystem, which is ensuring that countries have digital data policies and standards, they have adequate bandwidth, they're taking care of governance, cybersecurity, and other data risks, that there is initiatives for pushing e-government and virtual marketplaces and B2B exchanges in private sector. And then also looking at 5G, SD-WAN, and these other next generation communication technologies to allow systems and applications to function even when there's disruption. The second pillar is the workforce stabilization. We realize that work from home and teleworking now has become a very critical element. So ensuring that in the communities you have mobility solutions, access to broadband is very, very critical. Also, as this crisis unfolds and businesses and governments start looking at recovery, it's important to reskill their population using online virtual platforms, focusing on essential skills and digital skills. And finally, supporting some of these gig economy and virtual jobs, which can function even when there is a significant supply chain disruption, is another important aspect. The third pillar is the one which is very critical, the socioeconomic reinforcement. And many of the governments are already supporting small businesses by providing them loans and incentives. Strengthening of the public health system is very critical. Looking at the supply chain, especially in the essential areas such as food and energy and medical supplies, has been very, very important. Also looking at digitalization of the trade value chain using digital technologies such as RFID, IoT, automation, blockchain to ensure that trade and of products and services continues uninterrupted and can be automated as much as possible. And finally, enabling digital marketplaces to continue this investments in essential services. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, digital technologies now have moved from being a nice to have to being an essential imperative, and especially in the area of public services. Digital technologies and adoption of cloud, AI, automation is going to be a significant game changer. This enables governments to interact more transparently and more seamlessly with their citizens and offer them digital services, which again can continue to operate even when there is a significant disruption, either due to a pandemic like this or due to other natural calamities where supply chains and infrastructure may be impacted. So going forward, we believe that the business case for digital adoption and development of digital capabilities within the public sector is going to be even more evident. Next slide, please. So as we see the emergence of digital transformation as an important economic development lever, we at Avasant have developed a digital competitiveness index, which looks at the traditional parameters in terms of business ecosystem, human capital, infrastructure, and other elements. And in addition to that, adds this digital ecosystem component, where we're looking at the availability of digital skills, policies that support digital initiatives, and also the adoption of digital services within the government and within the private sector. So based on that, we're coming up with an index covering 80 different countries around the world, and we'll be ranking them as either leaders, innovators, challengers, or emerging. Next slide, please. And on this, and the next slide, we're just showing you a snapshot of this ranking that we're coming out with in terms of where these countries are placed. This ranking refers purely to the digital ecosystem maturity. The next slide will talk about the digital services competitiveness, which is the overall ranking, taking into account the traditional parameters and the digital ecosystem parameters. Now, why is this important? This is important so that development banks and institutions and governments can assess where they are in terms of digital maturity and competitiveness, and address those gaps by bringing in the right types of interventions. And going forward, I think the socioeconomic parameters will be aligned to how quickly, how effectively they can roll out these digital initiatives. So having this index enables public policy and other decision makers to make those right decisions. And finally, next slide, we'll talk about the platform also that we have launched as a service to the global community. This is an investment exchange platform called Global Equations, where we have loaded data of over 80 countries on everything from macroeconomic to their country risk profile, to their talent pool, to the kinds of private sector companies and other support ecosystem that's available there. And the idea is for countries to use this platform to showcase their strengths, attract investors. And on the other side, global companies, multinational, private equity groups, service providers, BPO companies can also use this platform to detect and locate the right locations and the right local partners that they can tie up with. The next slide gives you a little bit of a snapshot of a country profile, typical profile like Tanzania. And there's a lot more detail behind this. You're welcome to go to www.globalequations.com, where you can browse and look at a lot of this data. So to just summarize again, we feel that while digital transformation and building digital capabilities was a strong driver in the past, how the world has shifted towards a new normal, this is becoming an imperative. And we're looking forward to World Bank being an important catalyst in this digital transformation within the government sector as well as the private sector. Thank you, Samia, and back to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anupam. This was an excellent presentation. You gave a very good global perspective, which is exactly why I wanted you to start. And I'm looking at the Digital Competitiveness Index that your company has come up with, and I'm thinking there's a lot of alignment with what the World Bank is doing in doing business digitally. So definitely we need to connect a little bit these two indices together and have you talk to DEC. I also enjoyed very much your path to recovery, the fast track, and then the slower one. And I completely concur with you that countries that were already going digital are a lot more ready for the path to recovery. And of course, what can we do to help those that were not there pre-COVID-19?